couple up here. And 30 minutes or so to do a Q&A, but also tomorrow, if you guys are available, I actually have another panel for kind of like a Q&A on career. If you want to be a microbiologist, if you want to get into this field, I totally recommend coming to that tomorrow. And then we also have the guest of honor meet and greet, so you can ask some personal questions, not too personal, but personal enough, if you have anything that you want to know. But you'll totally know how to pronounce my name by the end of this. All right. So let's get started. If you're not here from Marten Microbiology, you are in the wrong room. And I hate to disappoint you guys, but I'm really not 3 Martens in a lab coat. I'm just a normal person. But let's get started. So a little bit about me. I am a senior scientist in vaccine research and development. I work over at NIH campus, frequently between Bethesda and Gaithersburg, Maryland, if you have ever been there. A lot of our stuff spans throughout Maryland and other states in the country. I have literally been in this field for 10 plus years. That kind of gives you an idea of my age, unfortunately. I'm trying to maintain that as much as I can. But it's been quite a ride. I originally thought that I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I realized that there were certain things that I could not end up doing because I really love animals and I hate saying goodbye, so it was just not my thing. But through that program, because I originally started out in veterinarian, the field, I found that I really enjoyed learning about viruses and zoonotic diseases, and that's gotten to me to where I am today. So Chise is a pine marten. I get red panda a lot, and I noticed when I compared them, I'm like, oh my gosh, she does look like a red panda a little bit, and I was like, okay, I can see where somebody would say that. I went suiting to our local Renaissance fair, and this girl was like, Mommy, look, a red panda, and I was like, oh God, no, but it's all good. It's totally okay. For pronunciation, again, it is Chise. So I'm gonna say it's my bad right here, because literally when I put, people will ask me, hey, how do you pronounce it? I'll literally give 2 interpretations, and I'm like, okay, which is easier for people? I'll literally say CHI, and then I was like, no, maybe it's better to just do CHEE, if I'm about to say cheetah. So, Chise. I get this question a lot as well. I joined the fandom in 2015. My first con was Anthrocon. A friend at the time let me borrow their suit, and I literally suited for 8 hours, not knowing what magical world I was walking into, and it was the best thing that ever happened, and now I'm head over heels for the fandom, and have been here ever since. So, a little bit about my lab. Adjust this ever so slightly. The goal of my lab is to better understand basic aspects of viral pathogenesis and apply that knowledge towards development of safer and more effective vaccines that you can take and protect yourself. We also focus on basic virological and immunological determinants of viral diseases, kind of analyzing the traits, such as, when COVID came onto the scene, we were familiar with SARS-CoV-1, but SARS-CoV-2 turned out to be a little bit more of a different beast. Also, I don't really do this as much now as I did before when I first started, but developing animal models to focus on, whether it's mice or sometimes a lot that I work with now is Chinese Chinese hamster ovary cells right now. But way back when, mice was pretty much my best friends when I walked into the lab, so I have to thank them personally. So again, you guys know, developing vaccines and monoclonal antibodies is kind of my thing. Right now, I feel like some people maybe think that, oh, COVID's not really a thing anymore, and yes, it is. I mean, today we are here, being able to meet in person, whereas back in 2020, that was not going to be a possibility. In 2021, we were starting out again. So literally, that is going to be something that is going to be on my plate for years to come. Once you develop vaccines for something, it doesn't just, go away. You're still sitting there and working with it, and we're updating vaccines for, pretty much every year at this point to be ready for the season, similar to what you do with influenza vaccines. Also, what I've been doing with my work, RSV has become a really big thing. We got those vaccines rolled out, which is fantastic because we really didn't have anything that was, super effective towards it. That's kind of been a beast that we're dealing with right now. Another one of my favorite projects at the moment has been enterovirus, working on monoclonal antibodies for that. Nipah virus, Zika, HIV is a huge project of mine right now and has literally been something that I've been focusing on. I think I've worked on this project for, oh my gosh, like over 1.5 years now. But slowly but surely we're getting towards more effective possibilities for HIV vaccines. Ebola, and hopefully, knock on wood, I'm probably going to sit there and jinx us, hopefully not too many more viral emerging pathogens at the moment, but those are pretty much my projects right now. Literally, the last point for sure too, prototype pathogen approach for pandemic preparedness. They're having it. Do me a favor, why don't you guys just do a house so that maybe they can hear us too. There we go.
Assert dominance.
Exactly. Okay, for the sake of ending this on time so that I don't get in trouble, we won't sit there and compete with them because they will lose eventually. But anyway, let's dive in. So, we're focusing on microbiology. First of all, according to proper definition, what is microbiology? It includes a bunch of different fields. Bacteria, fungi like molds and yeasts, protozoa, and my favorite of all, I don't want to sound biased, viruses. That's my favorite. That's pretty much what we're focusing on today, because if we were going to focus on everything, I would literally have you guys for like a semester of college or 2 semesters and then you're forever. So, 3 domains of microbiology. You've got bacteria, you've got archaea, and you've got eukarya. Okay? Your prokaryotes, where you have your bacteria and your archaea. Simple, and I don't mean simple as in like, oh my goodness, they don't do anything. Bacteria can be pretty bad. They're really, really nasty. A bacterial infection is not very fun. But they're simple. They're usually single-celled organisms. They actually have no nucleus and they have no membrane-bound structures. Whereas when you're dealing with eukaryotes, such as, I say algae, a lot of people say algae, both work. Fungi and protozoa, they are complex. They can be single or multicellular organisms. They have a nucleus. They contain a nuclear envelope, and they also contain cell membrane-bound structures like your mitochondria, your powerhouse of the cell, everybody and other membrane-bound structures. So, when we're talking about the phylogenetic tree of life, this reminds me of those old maps in the mall. I don't know if they have them anymore because I haven't stepped into a mall in a while, but it's literally like, you are here. This is where you are on this tree of life. Okay, so you can see, unfortunately we're not too close to slime molds, but fungi is right there, plants. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're sitting. So, one of my favorite slides, I'm gonna ask you guys, you can raise your hand or you can yell it out because this is always fun. Is a virus a prokaryote or a eukaryote?
No, neither. Depends.
Okay, oh my God, you guys are gonna be a hard crowd. That's awesome. So, right here, just for the sake, because there's other important ones that I want to show you. How many of you guys have seen Steven Universe, the movie? Okay, good. Spinell was one of my favorite characters, but there's a trope in a lot of cartoons where they utilize something that looks like a bacteriophage, and it literally looks like a spider almost, or an insect injecting something into another, which I'll show you on a microscope picture that we have. Literally, that's what they look like. That's not just out of somebody's mind. This literally looks like a little robotic figure that literally latches onto a cell and injects its contents. So when Spinell arrives, she sits there and she has, I can't remember what she called it, but literally it inserts itself into a planet and it starts to inject like a pink liquid, right? Literally, that's what a virus can do to your cell when it hijacks it. But for those of you who said neither, you are correct. Viruses are neither prokaryotic or eukaryotic. They're not made of cells. They cannot replicate on their own. They hijack your cells and they use them to replicate themselves. And most of us, being scientists, don't consider viruses to be living. I mean, we could go in an argument for like hours on end about it being alive or being dead, but literally they're neither. So, if you remember the last time that you were sick, there was a good chance that you started experiencing symptoms, and we call that symptomatic. If you're asymptomatic, you're not experiencing symptoms. If you're symptomatic, that means that you are. So remember when you felt sick, which I've had some really bad flus in the past where flu has just like knocked me down, and I've been down for like 3 days. High fever, body aches, just not feeling, I mean, your body almost feels swollen, and your skin almost feels like it's just a little bit, like it's almost like prickly. Like it's just like something, if it touches you, it doesn't feel too good. So literally what happens is that viruses or bacteria can make you feel this way. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are some helpful bacteria and viruses out there. Some animals have symbiotic relationships with them. For us, for example, I mean, you have healthy gut bacteria. If you didn't have that bacteria and you stripped your stomach of that, or your intestines, or your GI tract in general, you wouldn't be feeling too well. So those probiotics that you get, that bacteria that you consume, that's like good gut bacteria. So the good thing is, we can't really see viruses with our eyes, because I have a feeling if we could, nobody would walk out their door. We would see that they're really all around us, and what protects you from that is your immune system, and also vaccines and other medications that can help you and strengthen your immune system. But literally, if we could see them with our naked eye, they would literally be all around us. So catching viruses. Unfortunately, there are many ways that viruses can get into your body. Insects like mosquitoes, when we're talking about malaria, they can spread viruses between people that they bite. Colds can come from infected people with a sneeze or a cough. You know, respiratory spread, it happens. You can even catch viruses from touching what we call like a fomite. For example, yours truly had a really bad, nasty MRSA infection back in those college gym locker rooms are not the cleanly, like they're just not very clean. I was in an aerobics class. I happened to sit there and do what, you know, I mean, I was pretty young at the time. College student, popped a pimple because I didn't want anybody in my class to see it, and damn if I didn't sit there and touch my skin, and ended up with a MRSA infection. It's pretty bad. It is not a nice bacteria that can sit there and just eat your face. It's not good. So, whole point is that you can get them from a bunch of different things. I'm pretty sure I got that just from handling one of the doorknobs. So, important to be safe, be cognizant about what you're doing. If you're sick, stay home. You know, if you're sneezing, cover it up, put a mask on. A lot of people don't sneeze into the air. Cover it with your elbow. Do just like that. I know that sounded muffled, I'm sorry. And then of course, most importantly, wash your hands. I know I said pause on here. I'm gonna make this a sticker eventually. Wash your hands. Viruses will literally almost just kind of like slouch off your hands with that soap. They don't like bases. What is soap? It's base. So literally that helps. So now we're gonna get into like one of my favorite things to talk about. This is like one of my favorite slides. So what do viruses look like? Again, if you could see a virus, they would be all around you. However, when we look at viruses, when we're looking at electron microscopes, we see things like this. I mean, and it looks kind of funky, but let me explain. When you think about it, if we could magnify a cell until it was the size of a basketball, it would literally be like one of the dots on that page. It would be that tiny. So these guys are super, super small. When you're looking at parts of a virus, simple viruses literally only have 2 parts. They have a genome. It can be DNA or RNA. And that's a blueprint of instructions for making itself. So literally when a virus latches onto your cell and injects its contents, it's literally putting that in there. It's literally just a blueprint. If you can imagine building blocks, this tells your cells, hey, replicate this for me, even though in a perfect world, we really wouldn't want to be replicating it. That's what it does. And then 2, it's got a capsid protein shell that protects the genome. So these viruses know exactly how to protect themselves. They know what they're up against. But the good thing is that our immune system has plenty of things in its arsenal to help us as well. Viruses also often have proteins called receptors that stick out of the shell and help the virus sneak into our cells. Viruses also have something that's like a viral envelope. It's kind of like similar to cell membranes for our regular, like our normal cells, and that kind of protects it as well. And while these are just the basics, looking to the right side of the screen, this is one of my favorites. So we're gonna go starting from the top left and then to the right and then go down. You're looking at swine flu up top, that top left. Then to the right of that is vesicular stomatitis. You go down, we're looking at avian influenza. And then next to that one with the picture with the arrow, that's actually what SARS-CoV looks like. Can you guys see that it almost looks like what, the reason why they call it coronavirus, I think it's Latin for crown, and it literally looks like it's got those prongs sticking outside of it. That's what that is. And then also, one of my favorite ones, that bacteriophage. What I was telling you guys, it literally looks like, I guess when I was a kid, I always thought like, oh, it looks like a spider almost, but it kind of, in a sense, doesn't fully, but that's what bacteriophages look like. Next to that is Ebola. And then the next one, so we're looking at bottom left, that's one of the most interesting ones because it is almost like a perfect, I think that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's like pentagon shape. That is polio, of all things. Very, very uniform. It's kind of weird in that sense. And then next to it is something that is really nasty that I don't think anybody ever wants to deal with, is Marburg virus. So, how does a virus work? Kind of like what I already explained, a virus sits there and it hijacks your cells. It literally has a little book as to how to do this, but again, we can sit there and combat it. Your immune system is not totally deprived of being able to protect you, and you've got other tools on your side, like vaccines, to be able to protect you and teach your immune system how to deal with these guys. Quickly, what I had explained here, and what you can see in this little diagram, you've got receptors on your cells, and if you think of a lock and key mechanism, these viruses know how to sit there and lock into the receptors, which would be like the lock of your cells. Once it locks on, the virus inserts its contents, or viral DNA or RNA, into your cell, and it literally sits there and it programs your cell and tells it, hey, I want you to make this, this, and this for me. So unfortunately, your cell will take that and it will start replicating the virus. So again, viruses cannot replicate on their own. They literally need to use a cell to be able to do this, and they use your cells to do it. So it's always best to try to protect yourself so that this can't happen. And when I explain how a vaccine works, I'll show you exactly how our immune system can combat this. Viral diseases, we'll kind of go through these a little bit quickly because I want to give us enough time to reach the other slides. Viral diseases is literally very simple. It's a viral disease caused, or any illness or health condition that is caused by a virus. They're not always contagious. Most of them are, but they're not always. They can spread from person to person. Common examples of contagious viral diseases are like flu, what we call the common cold. I never liked us referring to it as the common cold because the common cold isn't caused by one virus, it's caused by different viruses. Adenoviruses, rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, all of those can cause a cold. HIV is also another one, and also herpes. And then we talked earlier about like how other viral diseases can spread through an insect, or touching an infected animal like rabies, or getting bitten, or touching, a bird that's been infected with avian influenza, those kind of things. Respiratory viral diseases, I'm sure everybody in here has been sick once. I don't think I would believe anybody in here ever not been sick. Okay, I didn't think so. All of us have been sick one time in our lives. And whether you were a kid or you were an adult and you've got a cough, you got that nasty itchy sore throat coming in, those are certain things that, or a fever or body aches, that's a respiratory viral disease coming through. Transmission, those are usually generated through coughing and sneezing. Like I said, if you are feeling sick, wear a mask. If you feel like you are on the verge of getting sick, start to isolate yourself. The faster that it's caught, the better. These viruses can also spread through contaminated objects like doorknobs, tabletops, and personal items. The good thing is that viruses can't live on certain surfaces for too long, so don't be too alarmed by that. They really have a preferred way of transmission. Treatment, usually these guys will go away on their own, but in certain cases, like with dealing with COVID-19, we really had to sit there and combat this as fast as we could with vaccines because it was kind of foreign to a lot of us, really didn't know how to deal with this at first, but a lot of these do go away on their own. Over-the-counter medications like Tamiflu, for example. We also have Paxlovid now for COVID. Those are certain things that you can take to help with things like this. And again, prevention, best way to prevent any virus or any disease spreading around. Good hygiene. Wash your hands, cover your face, those kind of things. They're having a really, really good time in there apparently. I'm kind of curious as to what panel that is. Gastrointestinal viral diseases. I feel like I have a fun story for every single disease under the sun at the moment, except for maybe STDs. But I got the most horrendous, and my husband was with me when I got this, the most horrendous norovirus infection I've ever had in my life. Do not eat oysters if it's not like, oh God, was that summer or warm fall? I can't remember when I had it. But I consumed some oysters. And the thing is with oysters, when it's warm, a certain type of lovely little thing loves to sit there and nest in oysters. And it doesn't really like your gastrointestinal system. I was out of commission for probably about 3 days, felt the worst ever in my life, and I could only sit there and link it back to what I ate because I had had them. I was in Virginia at the time, and they had been shipped over from Washington. But I should have paid attention. I should know this better because I'm from Maryland, and we're really big on seafood, and I should have known that time of year not to sit there and eat those. But at that time, it just wasn't really, I was only thinking about my stomach being empty. So these guys can usually sit there and cause things like stomach flu, vomiting, nausea. You really can't keep anything down, you're dehydrated, those kind of things. Transmission, it depends. I don't think many, I mean, people in the hospital when they're working with certain fluids, but food or water that's been contaminated can usually lead to things like this, such as oysters that have been contaminated. Unfortunately, there's not really too many treatment options for this. Normally, you will just have to kind of weed it out, but the most important thing when you're sick with anything is to stay hydrated. Viruses do not like your body being in optimal condition. They like to disturb your homeostasis. So the important thing is to keep yourself up, consume some vitamin C, stay hydrated, and rest. Prevention, again, I'm going to tell you this probably like time and time again. Prevention is washing your hands. Everything comes through these, okay? So keep that in mind. Exanthematous diseases are viruses that can cause skin rashes. I hope everybody in here, if you've seen my last one for some strange reason, for reasons unknown to me, measles is still present. It shouldn't be. The measles vaccine has been out since like the 1970s, and unfortunately, I think, if I'm not mistaken, because I don't always like to listen to, the, how do I put it? With vaccines causing autism, I'm pretty sure it was the MMR vaccine that people were trying to sit there and paint as that. I'm like, okay, it's not.
And it was all lies.
Exactly.
They also almost killed a child.
Time and time again. So, please, if you have not, you should have 2 doses of MMR. I unfortunately had to sit there and get more because when I started at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, unfortunately the nurse could not read my my GP's writing, because I've noticed that as time goes on and you get into masters and then PhDs, your writing becomes very, very scribbly. Doctors don't really have the neatest writing. So she could not read what he had wrote, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to get this vaccine again. So I did. So yeah, examples of these include measles, rubella. Anybody in here had chickenpox? Yeah, okay, so you guys had it before the vaccine was available, right? I was very jealous of my siblings because I think it was in 1998 the vaccine had come out, and unfortunately myself and my cousins, who didn't really know at the time, decided to all sit in a row and scratch each other's backs. And so it's great that that is out now, but yeah, that's not something fun to deal with. Smallpox is another big one. Monkeypox would also fall under these. Chikungunya virus infection is not a fun one. So yeah, These are actually spread through respiratory droplets as well. Again, treatment would focus on managing symptoms, and then prevention, obviously, MMR vaccine, definitely one to make sure that you have on board. Smallpox, obviously, we kind of dealt with monkeypox coming up, completely different than smallpox, but still a pox virus. But we do have smallpox vaccines. I actually had to get that one before I started my line of work. And it is a very interesting vaccine where it's a bifurcated needle, and you literally kind of like lay up against a wall, and the person administering it takes this bifurcated needle and like does like this on your shoulder like 20 times. Yes, exactly. And so the thing is that literally you don't want to sit there and take this bandage off. You have to sit there and let it, kind of heal, and then eventually the nasty little scab falls off, and then you're not technically contagious. But it is a live vaccine, so not everybody can get it. But that was probably one of my more interesting vaccines I've gotten, I would say. Except for maybe, rabies vaccines aren't too pretty because you get numerous ones, and it's either pretty sure it's in your stomach or it's in your rump, and they're not very fun. So,
My dad had that.
hepatic viral diseases. These guys are pretty much known to cause inflammation of the liver. These are more common like hepatitis, okay? So we've gotten vaccines for these before when we were kids. There's vaccines for both hepatitis A and hepatitis B. There is one for E, but it's not technically available in the US. These guys normally like to be transmitted from person to person through body fluids. So coming into contact with things like blood, needles, razors, and then hepatitis B is kind of different in the fact that it can be spread through sexual contact. So things like that to just keep an eye out for. I gotta ask you guys, has anybody watched Osmosis Jones? Okay, perfect. I'm so glad, because actually this is like one of the best villains ever. He was actually very scary in my opinion, but I thought he was a pretty good character. Cutaneous viral diseases. These guys kind of cause lesions, or like you ever had, I don't think too many, bless you, like warts, those kind of things. Oral herpes, genital herpes, like things that you just don't want to really deal with. They are contagious, obviously. Prevention, good hygiene habits, hygiene. And that is literally going to be the word to take away from this. So things like that can pretty much reduce your risk of developing a disease. Okay, we're getting towards, oh no, I still have a couple, never mind. Hemorrhagic viral diseases. These guys are pretty severe. They can involve damage to your circulatory system. High fever, body aches, bleeding through the skin, things that you really don't want to deal with. They're not too pretty. Dengue, yellow fever. Yellow fever is a vaccine that you have to get if you're traveling to certain countries. Ebola is probably one that a lot of us know in here because it was in the news and just everywhere. So.
And in Dallas.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you know what? Duh. What am I talking about? Yeah, so exactly. So everybody knows about Ebola when that popped up. Unfortunately, there's no specific treatment for these guys yet. I say yet because science is evolving every day, and we are working on new things every day to, optimize care. But for right now, when it comes to things like when Ebola popped up, isolation was a big one, staying hydrated always, so a lot of IV fluids to maintain electrolyte balance. We are in the process of developing vaccines, but as I told you guys before, a yellow fever vaccine is currently available for if you're traveling to areas where yellow fever is common. Okay, I'm gonna show my age as well on this. Anybody know where this GIF is from? Okay, there we go, yeah. Okay, if you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend it because that was one of the best battles that I've ever seen. I mean, how smart was it for him to turn himself into a little microscopic, to sit there and make Madam Mim sick. I thought that was extremely intelligent. Neurologic viral diseases. God, I got a good story for this one too. Finals week, University of Maryland, it was my freshman year. I had a roommate that was not a huge fan of me. We didn't always get along, and sometimes that happens when you're coming in contact with strangers and you have to try and get along. I unfortunately had fallen asleep on my desk, like with my head like this. and I was studying my equine science for my equine science exam at the time. Well, I kind of woke up hours later and I just literally could not move my neck. It was so stiff from the position that I sat in, and I'm kind of going like this and it's not working. Well, she decides to sit there and go run and tell the RA, I think she's got viral meningitis. So I was like, okay. They take that really seriously on college campuses. So I had to go to the hospital, and my mom was supervisor of CT scans. So we went to the hospital that she worked at, and that was the first time I've ever seen a needle that's used for a spinal tap. So that was really fun. Needless to say, we weren't roommates the next year. But it's all good, because then I learned how they sit there and find out if you've got viral meningitis. They literally stick a needle in between two vertebrae in your spine, and they pull out some fluid and analyze it. So yeah, needless to say, I tried to sit there and tell my RA I'd literally just fallen asleep in a really bad position, but you know, it's all good. Next day I was back to normal and I took my finals. So this is also where we start to get into the fact of what you can do to protect yourself. Your immune system is here to help you. And I kind of gave this away, but what's the largest organ that you have? Your skin. Boom, exactly. Your skin is so important. It's your first barrier against any infection. Okay, this is why it's super important, speaking from experience. Don't pop your pimples, don't scratch your face, nothing. Any little opening that you have in your skin gives opportunity for something to enter it. If you properly disinfect, like let's say that you get a little bit of a cut, wash it off, maybe some peroxide and alcohol, bandage it up if you have to, close it up, let it heal. Best way to protect yourself, because your skin is super important. Epithelial cells, if you look at your hands and you see that if you think your skin is made of like a smooth surface, it's really not. You have millions of epithelial cells just protecting you in every inch of your body. So when we talk about things like this, your immune system is actually quite amazing. Also, because there's so much material in here, because I really do like to talk about all this, I will give you this presentation if you want, because if we were going through everything, it would probably take us like hours on end, which I wouldn't sit there and do that to any con. But knowing that this is your first layer of protection. Hey, your immune system. We got little buddies here to protect us, things like macrophages that are early to the scene. Macrophages are cell-eating machines. Their name actually means big eater in Greek. These guys are the biggest type of white blood cells. They are usually the first type of cell at an infection, along with neutrophils, to protect you. They pretty much get to the infection through your blood. They kind of use it as like a little railway system to get to the infection. Anybody in here ever had a splinter? Yeah, I have too. I wouldn't listen to my mom about not touching the cactus that she had in her bedroom. So as a kid, I would literally just go like this, and I learned every time, but I guess I didn't really learn enough because I would still do it. It was just super interesting to me. But removing a splinter, it's a little bit swollen after you remove it, right? That swelling is actually a key that your immune system is trying to work to help you out, that inflammation. So yeah, while it hurts and it's a little bit uncomfortable, it's actually your immune system at work. Neutrophils. I'm sorry, that's like one of my favorite gifts because they actually look really cute. These guys are early to the scene as well. They're the most common type of white blood cell. They're usually first to the scene along with macrophages. They fight off invaders in your body in a number of ways. They can eat them, they can fire microbial proteins at them, but they can actually also set web traps outside of cells to catch anything. So your body is like this little fighting machine that has like, you know, this little army to help you out. I always used to sit there and say that when it came to like things like B cells and T cells, like, you know, one is your sword and one is your shield. That's kind of how your body works to help you out. Your immune system, actually, this was a really good segue. T cells are my favorite also because nobody gives them enough credit. Your B cells are usually like your first preliminary fighter, but your T cells never, ever, ever forget a virus. They know it. This is why you've got T memory cells. When B cells sit there and originally sit there and fight whatever virus that you have, your T cells are going to remember that, which is why vaccines work in the sense that you sit there and you protect yourself. If you ever come into contact with that virus again down the line, your T cells retain that memory as to how to help fight it. This is just like about T cell screening, so I can pass on this one just for time's sake, because this ends at 4. Okay, so we've got about 55 minutes. That actually is not too bad. I am gonna take a drink really quickly. So, you might think that B cells got their name because they are made inside your bones. While it's true that most of these blood cells are made inside the bone marrow, that's not where the B came from, which is actually kind of interesting. The name actually comes from the bursa, and a bursa is an organ that is only found in birds. Why they decided to name it this, I really don't know, but you know, I guess it works in the end. Again, when I was telling you guys, what's the difference between B cells and T cells? B cells attack invaders outside of your cells, and then T cells will come along and they'll attack the infected cells. So that's kind of how they work. Antibodies, remember when we were talking about the key and lock mechanism of how viruses work? Antibodies work in the same way, actually. So when you get vaccinated and your body produces antibodies, it literally works in the same way that those antibodies will come and link to the receptors of your cells, so that when a virus comes in, it kind of bounces back off because it's protected by that antibody. And like I was telling you, memory cells never forget. That's the great thing. So these T cells are super important, where you can build memory cells without getting sick by getting vaccinated. Actually, that's actually one of my favorite pictures right there, the wanted poster with the little virus too. It's actually really, really cute. But, so if you can see up here, take for example when COVID-19 is still technically considered a novel virus because we're still learning like new things about it every day. But let's take the first time that you might have gotten sick with COVID. If anybody has anybody had COVID in here? Okay, I was gonna say, you're a trooper if you haven't gotten it yet. I actually got it. I felt like I was doing all the right things. And I went to my family's house for Christmas. I think this was when Omicron was first popping up on the scene, was in there for a day. 2 days later, my mom says, oh, hey, your brother and sister have COVID. And I was like, okay, I'm not sure I'm gonna get out unscathed from this, but here we go. Turns out the next day I had it. Good thing was though, I had already had vaccines on board, so it really wasn't as bad as it could have been. But right here, the first time a virus attacks your body, this is pretty much the antibodies made. So you see, not too many antibodies are made at first, and this is why sometimes when people say, oh, I'm gonna just do it the natural way and I'm gonna get infected. Well, unfortunately, that's not always a very good idea. And what bothers me is that people say natural as if vaccines are not natural. It's utilizing your immune system to produce these antibodies. There's nothing unnatural about that. But you know, some of these people don't always understand how that works, so I'll try and give them like a little bit benefit of the doubt, just ever so slightly. But the second time, whole point is that once you face that infection, and let's say that you do have a vaccine on board, those antibodies, the second time you get that, 10 times better. It sits there and it helps you even make it through. You possibly could have had COVID a second or third time and maybe never experienced anything from it because the antibodies in your system were like, okay, let's go, I know how to do this. I've seen this before. Vaccine science. Yes, I had to add Balto on there because I love boars. I'm not even going to sit there and go too in depth as to what is like a vaccine, because we all know what a vaccine is. I mean, all of us have gotten vaccinated in here, I'm pretty sure, or we've had vaccines when we were kids, so we all know this. The interesting part that I will cover on here is how vaccines came to be. Literally, the root of the word vaccine literally comes from vacca, which is Latin for cow. And the reason why it's named after cows is because of how vaccines were discovered. Smallpox was present once upon a time, still is kind of, but not fully. We still have vaccines for it just in case, obviously. Cowpox was a thing. So literally, Edward Jenner came to find, not related to any of the Jenners that we might know today, just FYI. This was a long time ago. I mean, this is 1768 we're talking about. But literally learned how to inoculate people against cowpox. So that's where vacca comes from, and then vaccine, so administration of that. This is also one of my favorite slides, herd immunity. Herd immunity. I actually had to sit there when I was putting this together. I love this because it's like, I think, I'm gonna probably botch this up, but if I remember my Lion King correctly, it was Bonsai that said this quote, and he said, can't I just pick off one of the little sick ones? Literally what animals do when they are in a herd is they will sit there and they will create a circle around older animals and sick or young animals. And that is where herd immunity comes from. It's that protection. So the more of us that protect ourselves against viruses or get vaccinated, the better it is for everybody, because we also have to understand not everybody can get vaccinated. People have allergies. We found out really quickly that some people had allergies to mRNA vaccines because of the lipid nanoparticles. People, I mean, it's a common allergy because it's used, there are materials that are used in things like, oh my gosh, I think that's on this slide, hang on. I gotta get myself back into this for a minute. When those vaccines first came out, a lot of people are not okay with polyethylene glycol. It's commonly used in a lot of medical or medicines, I should say. So you find out, unfortunately, that you're allergic to it by using something that has it in it. But the good thing is that was caught relatively quickly. So then we find out some people can't use mRNA vaccines. So then other vaccines were developed as well that, you know, could be used as a substitute. But then for those who can't get vaccinated, the more people that are, the better you can protect everyone. So, well, here I have it on here. Who shouldn't be vaccinated? Again, people who are allergic. Some people have immune problems or too young or too old to be able to get it. So it's better for those of us who do have healthy immune systems to get it. That's another one that's loud over there. That's amazing. So one thing that I addressed a long time ago and still do to this day, someone will say, but I still got infected. Does that mean the vaccines don't work? No, it does not mean that your vaccine doesn't work. There is something that is called sterilizing immunity, and there's protective immunity. Protective immunity is literally the development of antibodies to prevent an infection. There are very, very few sterilizing vaccines available. I think at one point people thought that the MMR vaccine was sterilizing. It's very effective. It's like 98, 99% effective. So you're literally just about there. Polio vaccine is another example. However, other than that, there are very few vaccines that are used today that totally can be considered sterilizing. And the way that protective immunity works is that you will get vaccinated, and that vaccine will sit there and maybe not prevent you from getting infected, but it will prevent you from ending up in the hospital or worse. So rather than ending up in the hospital, you might end up with some body aches, some fever, some cough, or sore throat. But it's much better than the alternative. So that's where the effective or protective immunity comes in. Sterilizing meaning that once it's done and over with, you never ever you never get it again. But again, that's very, very, very rare. What do vaccines do? They stimulate your immune system. It's literally like giving you a little crash course before you come into contact with the real thing. It's like pretty much studying before a test. You don't want to walk into a test and not know what's going to be on it, or just kind of walk in and just say, okay, I'll wing it, or I'll just fly by the seat of my pants. Vaccines sit there and stimulate your immune system, gives you a little blueprint as to what you're dealing with, and people will say, oh, well, that vaccine made me sick. I felt really terrible. I felt really crappy after getting that. And unfortunately, I know that some people don't want to hear it, but that is literally the vaccine working to teach your immune system to do what it does. Now, before anyone freaks out, if you didn't get a robust, immune reaction from the vaccine, doesn't mean it didn't work. No, everybody's immune system is different. It's like as unique as a fingerprint on your hand. So whereas I might have sat there and felt like, oh my gosh, I'm achy, I can't do anything today, I can't lift my arms, somebody might have been able to get vaccinated and walk out and be able to sit there and lift weights for like the next 30 minutes and be fine. Everybody is different. I know some people get knocked on their butts and they're like, oh my gosh, I had to be in bed for like a day. That's your immune system working. I will skip through these only just to save time because I know there are questions afterwards, but these slides are literally talking about how vaccines are made and the different types of vaccines. So we've got live vaccines, like I was telling you guys before, like smallpox, measles, and yellow fever are considered live. Inactivated, the one that you guys are probably most familiar with, are probably influenza vaccines. Those are weakened version. Subunit vaccines, not super common. We've got recombinant vaccines. Toxoid vaccines, this is a really interesting one. Toxoid vaccines don't contain the pathogen itself, in case like usually bacteria. Instead it holds the toxins, like one that we are all probably very familiar with if you've watched Balto's, diphtheria. Or if you have gotten tetanus, like you've stepped on a rusty nail, unfortunately, or you've scratched yourself against some metal, having a tetanus, and you should get a tetanus vaccine like every 10 years just to be safe, it helps. Because you definitely don't want lockjaw, it's not very pretty. Making vaccines. I had to add in Jake because I love that scene. So, making vaccines, there are a lot of steps to this, there are a lot of departments. It is a very lengthy process. Vaccines can take years to come up with, and people will come to me and say, Chise, well, if vaccines take years to make, well, how did the COVID vaccine come, so quickly? And I'm like, you don't understand. Number one, we were in the middle of a pandemic. We had to sit there and act fast. Number two, one thing that people don't realize, when SARS actually came to be, I'm talking about SARS-1, not SARS-2, we had actually worked on a vaccine. That vaccine served as a blueprint for the COVID-19 vaccine. So it's not like we were just starting from the ground up. We've had research for over a decade at that point. So people don't realize that. So if you ever hear somebody say, oh yeah, they were developed in a year and they're not safe, you just tell them that you know better and this is the blueprint for them. So the thing is that it depends on what pathogen you're working with. For example, HIV. HIV research started even before I was born and still continues to this day, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and I will personally speak from experience, and my husband knows this too because this is one project that I've come back home and I've literally just banged my head against the wall because things have failed. It can go so quickly. One day you're like, oh my gosh, my research is progressing, this is fantastic. The next day you come back and you see that your cells that you were working with prior just kind of dropped in viability, and oh my gosh, you gotta start from ground zero again. It sucks, but it is all part of the process. So it takes time, effort, teamwork. I mean, we work with people all around the country, different universities, different research centers. It takes time. So for COVID-19 vaccines, because most of you probably know me from working on Moderna's COVID vaccine with NIH, this one pretty much just, I'm not gonna say propelled my career, but it was definitely something that, let me put it to you like this, when I talk to people in seminars at NIH, I always start out with the fact that I never ever thought that a pandemic was going to be one of the biggest things that I ever worked on and worked with. So it was a huge team, effort to sit there and do this. It was hours upon hours on, days when you sit there and you get this news and you know that you got to work on it quick. And I mean, I'll never forget when I got in trouble for this with my boss at the time, where I fell asleep outside of Dr. Fauci's office, and I didn't realize it was his office at the time because I literally, he's got several offices in different buildings where, because he's going from well, he's not there anymore, obviously, everybody knows that he's retired. But at that time, he had kind of had one in one of the buildings, just kind of like a temporary office, and I didn't realize that that's where he was. So I kind of ate lunch, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna take just a 5-minute nap because I was exhausted. And my boss was like, yeah, he literally sits down the hall, so be careful. So the whole point is that mRNA vaccines obviously are not super new, even though everybody wants to think that they are. mRNA vaccines were years in development and work. Actually, the first mRNA vaccines were kind of focused on cancer. That's another one of my projects at the moment that we're working on, but literally we have been working with mRNA for quite some time. So everybody thinks, oh, COVID sat there and put mRNA vaccines into the limelight. I'm like, no, oh, we've been working with these for a minute, it's been cancer, but they just weren't that prominent to the public. So this kind of put them in the, spotlight. Viral vector vaccines, I don't think a lot of us get these here because Johnson & Johnson vaccine isn't really used here, but I'm pretty sure, did anybody get Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Okay, so you got one when it first came out. Did you get mRNA after it or no?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like it worked as a good supplement to start, but originally the virus sat there and started to kind of like mutate and get across things. So like before where we thought, a Johnson & Johnson vaccine was one and done, it turned into something a little bit different, so it was good to supplement with mRNA. But viral vector vaccines, did anybody in here get AstraZeneca? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so were you guys in the UK at the time, or, okay. I was gonna say, because I know that unfortunately, AstraZeneca is literally, when I go to the VPP in Gaithersburg, I see AstraZeneca when I drive in, I see Novavax, and I also see Pfizer buildings, and I'm like, oh, so that's where AstraZeneca is here. But yeah, so AstraZeneca is another one that didn't really, they're working on other projects here in the US, but it's one that wasn't really administered here. Everybody knows about variants at this point. I think if you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen me talk about every single variant that has popped up. Good news and bad news, obviously. Bad news being that COVID is going to be here with us. It is a coronavirus. We've got 4 other endemic human coronaviruses that are present that we have been dealing with. It is probably one that has caused your cold at some point in time in your life. The bad news is that COVID is not going away. The good news is that we now have tools and processes to deal with it. And it's kind of living proof as to where we are today. Whereas 4 years ago at this point, I think March 13th, March 13th was the anniversary, because I'll never forget that weekend. We wouldn't have been here. So while people might say, oh, well, COVID got weaker, not necessarily. It's just that we developed tools to fight against it that are better. So keep those things in mind. It's really important to get vaccinated. Ignore this part about picking up a flyer. I did not get to print them in time. And then when I came here, this is my first TFF. So when I realized that there was a FedEx here, I was like, oh my God, why didn't I do it? But if you ever want these are available. Like I said, I can give you guys these, just message me on Twitter. I will give you the presentation. It is not a problem whatsoever. But literally, this is just what we were talking about too during opening ceremonies. If you were there, everybody knows the 6-2-1 rule. You want 6 hours of sleep. This is all to maintain proper homeostasis for your body. The better that you take care of your body, the worse it is for any virus, bacteria, anything. Those things do not like homeostasis. They just don't. They want to disrupt it. So you stay hydrated, you eat meals, you keep your body going, take a shower at least once a day. Just keep in mind, these are like the bare minimum limit. I don't recommend, only getting 6 hours. If you can get 7 or 8, listen, I know. I get up every day probably around 3 or 4 a.m., so I understand not getting a lot of sleep. If there's a night where I can't sleep and I'm going to bed at like past 11, I'm like, okay, that's just gonna be how it is. But the more sleep that you get, the better to help out. Eat at least 2 meals per day and take at least 1 shower per day. Hygiene, remember again, viruses don't like bases. Your soaps are basic. And I don't mean basic in that sense. I mean it's a base and not exactly. You have acid and you've got base. So just remember, it's a base. They don't like it. Remember to wash your hands, cover your nose, get vaccinated if you can, and if you can't, just do other things to be able to protect yourself, and leave it to those of us with healthy immune systems to get vaccinated. Wear a mask. If you're sneezing, coughing, cover it up. It's really simple. We've been through this before. And please, 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 if you can, stay home if you're sick. I know it's really hard. It's very hard calling off when you're sick. There are days where I just feel not the best, and I'm like, okay, I still have to go in. If I'm not always feeling too hot, I will wear a mask and literally just go around the lab. You do what you have to do, but again, if you can stay home, that is the best way to do it. It stops them in their tracks. Isolation is super important. And again, this is where you can find me. I'm Sailor Ruska. I know. It's the old bird. I just can't get to the point where we're X. So yeah, that's where I am on Twitter. And then you can also email me. That's another way to do it for those of us who don't want to use Twitter, because I don't think Blue Sky has Blue Sky doesn't have DMs yet, you can email me, askchise@gmail.com. I made it really simple and set up a separate email just for questions or anything like panel. And then always remember science rules. And that's with that, we actually have a good amount of time. I remembered because I was sent a message. I have a photo shoot to do. I'm helping a friend at 5 o'clock. So it is 3:26 right now. So we have some time for some questions. Or if you have comments, questions, whichever. All right, so I've got 1, 2, 3. You first, second, third. And then fourth. Okay, wait a minute. Keep your hands up for a second. Okay, so we got a lot of questions. Let me get you guys first in the front, and then we'll continue on. So you first.
So my name is Pint. I'm actually a recent graduate in microbiology, graduated last year.
Awesome.
Thank you. What I really want to ask is, while I'm trying to get a career in and break into the field and all that, how do I prevent what I learned from dropping out of my head? How do I stay current?
Oh, how do you stay current? That's a really good question. So I don't know if you're free tomorrow, but I also have a Q&A panel on, oh, you're coming tomorrow?
I already scheduled it in. As soon as you said you can help me with like the resume and all that, I'm like, in there.
There we go. Yes, because I've gotten this question so many times in my DMs, like, hey, how did you, what did you do? What school did you go to? What programs did you pay attention to? In my opinion, the best thing to do to stay on top of things, because everybody's like, how are you on top of this news? How do you always have X, Y, and Z? I actually subscribe to a lot of science journals, and when I say science journals, I mean reputable science journals. Stay on top of it. Don't, excuse me, that's the Red Bull. I know energy drinks are not always the best for me, but I need it. Stay on top of that. I follow New England Journal of Medicine is a fantastic one. Science Daily, like staying with the reputable ones, not sensationalist headlines that want to alarm people or anything, but like just some of the concrete ones. And I will go over those tomorrow as well, but it's the best way to stay current and not forget things. The other thing that I do, I know a lot of people might call it old-fashioned if you want. Yes, I am old, I'm sorry. I keep my textbooks. I've kept all of my textbooks except for like maybe some of the super expensive ones that as a college student I was like, okay, I can get some money back for this. I've kept a lot of my old textbooks. When we've moved, I literally had boxes upon boxes of textbooks. It helps so much to be able to go back and reference things because a lot of stuff can change, but it's always good to have that old source material. But definitely peer-reviewed sources, reputable journals, follow people that are like, in the know when it comes to certain things, but always the really important thing is peer review. Because you can't just sit there and take someone's word for it. That's why I love when
and all that comes from.
Exactly. What I love is when I post things on Twitter and some people don't always read the thread and they're like, what's your source? And I'm like, listen, if there's one thing that I always do consistently, you will always find the sources to my tweets at the bottom and in the thread. So the best way to stay on top of it. But I'll go into a lot more of that tomorrow at the career Q&A.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so you in the purple.
How interesting the peer review process can get.
Oh my gosh, it's a hassle. So I'm going to give like a little bit of insight as to what we talked about at NIH, because I know there were some people in another lab that were like, oh, the peer review process takes time, but you notice that some people's studies we're getting into journals relatively quickly, but journals get themselves in trouble by doing that sometimes too. Because you can tell, oh, this person's study made it in, but mine didn't. The process is kind of lengthy, but in my opinion is completely necessary because I'm trying to think. It might have been a couple of years ago. So, okay, I'm gonna push that away. There was a study, I think, that had been put out, I can't remember the journal, but people were outraged that it was ever published. And then they found out that maybe it shouldn't have gotten through the peer review process because some of the people weren't vetted. But it's just...
I mean, the Wakefield study had that.
I'm pretty sure, yeah. So the whole point is to answer your question in a very short, concise statement. while it's lengthy, it's necessary. I mean, it sucks. We've put out papers, or we've given papers and submitted them, and you probably won't see them present for like months or even
Mine
years.
took like 2 months.
Yeah,
to get
it
through.
can take a minute. And then sometimes the other thing that might worry me a little bit is that when you put and submit a study or you submit your paper, you're almost worried that maybe in a couple of months it becomes irrelevant. And that's what scares me. You know, like for example, I think there was a study that just came out, and I was reading about it because people were tagging me in it, about how mRNA vaccination had like less adverse reactions or instances compared to getting infected by COVID. And I'm like, okay, well that was common knowledge to me like years ago, but now they have more proof. Then when I look at when the study was done, I'm like, oh my gosh, this was back in 2021, 2022. And it's not 2024. So you're like, it takes time. I wish that we had some way to make it go a little bit faster, but maybe once down the line. It's kind of difficult. Now you had a question, and then anybody else who has one, we will start.
I have like a couple, but I don't want to like bite into anyone else's time, so, yeah.
I will be at 2 panels tomorrow too, so.
Okay, so can you tell me how eosinophilic folliculitis works? The dermatologist told me that the patient is basically allergic to their own sweat.
Oh my gosh, okay. I have not, okay, I would probably have to come back to you on that one, only because that's something that I haven't even done like further research into, but I have heard people being allergic to their own sweat. It's kind of crazy. There was actually, I will admit, I have been guilty when it comes to like trashy reality TV. I watched The Housewives. There was actually a lady that talks about getting her sweat glands removed because that is something that happened to her. It's kind of crazy. I'm not totally sure I believe her on that she got them removed, but yes, I have heard people, like it literally causes like bad reaction, kind of like almost flaky skin. So I'll look more into that and get back to you on that one, but you can ask another question.
Okay, can you dispel the myth that HIV came from a guy and a chimp having an encounter?
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow. Oh, goodness gracious. Like, anybody who sits there and spreads that around doesn't really know how zoonotic diseases work, which is something that I'm going to go into tomorrow, too. So, yeah, trust me, that is not how that happened. I wish the internet wouldn't spread stuff like that.
So the most relevant, they actually don't 100% know how it crossed over, but the most relevant explanation they have is they believe that during, and it all goes back to England, it's all during the English occupation of that area, there was a famine that was occurring because the English basically was withholding food supplies. And the people in the area resulted to eating what's known as bushmeat, which is animals that they can find. And they think, in this particular case, they got a hold of some that either they ate it was contaminated, or in the process of capturing the animals, they were bitten. And that basically is how it initially jumped. Why the widespread spreading? Well, because they were also going through a famine, they were also going through an economic crisis. And one of the best ways you can make money in an economic crisis is the world's oldest profession.
Okay then. All right.
Kind of interesting the history behind it, right? So that's why also, like when I said it earlier, when it comes to like contaminated food or liquids, be careful. Yeah. So, all right, next question. I've got, okay, so let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're gonna just go like this.
Okay. First off, I did not know you went to Vanderbilt. I have a lot of family in Tennessee. I think I have like a family member who like works at Vanderbilt Hospital or somewhere around there. But so out of all the questions that I'll probably just answer eventually watching YouTube documentaries, I believe I was watching Kurzergast. I think you've heard of it probably. Kurzergast, they have like little ducks. They do the science stuff on YouTube. Kurzergast. Yeah. Yes.
I don't think I have, but
Curse again.
Kurzergast, yeah.
okay.
Okay, but anyways, they talked about bacteriophages, which I think are viruses in a sense. Right?
It's a virus.
they are.
Literally bacteriophages.
Yeah. But on that, how has that worked in the medical field? Because I think they used that once for a heart disease on someone. How does that work? Like, especially just like with curing it, and also maybe as a vaccine.
Now that I would not know, unfortunately, because we don't use those, but I have heard of bacteriophages being utilized in medicine. That would actually be something cool that I would want to do down the line, but unfortunately that's not.
Phages are used to treat multi-resistant bacteria,
Mhm.
multi-antibiotic resistant.
Remember when I told you guys that not all
Plasma.
viruses and bacteria are bad? There's some use to some.
Also the same. That would be questionable using Kurtzgat as a source on
Yeah.
anything. Check their funding.
Like, I love YouTube videos, but I could never give one as a, oh, here's my source. You know what I mean? Like, so, I love them, but I could never ever do that. But I will try and check them out just to see. Because I'm curious. Okay, we're going to stay on this. Were you number 2? Okay, yes.
So I am neither a scientist nor do I play one on TV. But, so my questions might be a little basic for this
Oh,
round.
it's fine.
But my questions are twofold. The first one is, you mentioned protective and sterilizing immunity. You said that sterilizing immunity is very rare, but can you give an example?
So, for example, when polio first came onto the scene, everybody considered polio vaccines to be sterilizing. What helped is because a lot of people were so tired of hearing people about getting polio or afraid of getting polio themselves, literally everybody went out and got vaccinated for it. Like, I wish that the response that we had had for polio would have been the response that we had for COVID, because in my perfect world, in my mind, maybe, if we had taken it seriously and had gotten to, like, you know, literally the crux of the issue, and people had gotten vaccinated and not allowed it to spread as much as we did, we could have had another case of literally just being on, like, polio is eradicated. You know what I mean? So polio once upon a time was considered, I mean, I technically, if I had to look back in history, I would consider it a sterilizing vaccine, especially with how effective it was. Now the problem is now these days is that you might hear of a case of polio. Remember polio in the wastewater? I think I want to say it was New York? Yeah. Problem is that if you don't sit there and get vaccinated, or you travel to a country, then you pick it up and then you come back, well, you know. The thing is, though, is that people, I would actually, you know what, now that I think about it, I would still consider polio a sterilizing vaccine, because the thing is that when that gentleman came back into the US, the thing is that those people who had polio, had already been vaccinated against polio, you're literally kind of one and done at that point. You didn't have to go get a booster. You didn't have to say, oh my gosh, it's present, I have to go get it now. Same kind of actually with MMR. If you've gotten MMR as a kid, you've gotten 2 vaccines or 2 doses, and you have been interacting with somebody who has measles, because unfortunately some people aren't vaccinating their children against it. You're likely not going to sit there and get it unless you're like, you know, it's been a minute, or you're compromised, or your immune system just, you know, didn't, or let's say you just didn't get vaccinated at all. So those are common examples, but a lot of vaccines, like for example, influenza, definitely not sterilizing, because there have been plenty of times where people have gotten vaccinated against influenza and have gotten it, unfortunately. But the thing is that you literally have made it so that you aren't sitting there and facing some detrimental effects from influenza. Because on a good year, our influenza vaccines are probably about 60% effective against symptomatic infection, but it prevents severe infection. So that's kind of the difference between the two.
Thank you. And
Absolutely.
secondly, sorry,
Sure.
so you said you're also working on the HIV vaccine, but can you talk a little bit about why that one is so hard to crack?
Oh gosh, HIV I feel like has just escaped people so much, because the thing is that, well, HIV like really just tears your immune system apart. I mean, people are severely, I mean, most people who have had it, I think, or have it, you know, are dealing with something horrendous attacking their immune system. The reason why I think HIV keeps avoiding, like, I'm going to speak from, like, I guess not personal experience, but from what we've seen in other instances. Once you sit there and you've gotten past a certain phase, because you've got different phases, you've got preclinical trials, you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Normally it doesn't get past phase 1 trials, so it's very difficult to sit there and counter that. But with mRNA on the scene and dealing with, you know, a different, Sorry. It's just very good at evading. It's something that I wish that I could kind of sit there and talk about for hours on end, but HIV is just very good at evading things. You can have a really good study that maybe has like a couple of participants and it looks super effective. But then when you expand that population and you get to people who are actually, because most HIV vaccines start out with obviously healthy participants. It's when you start to get into with more of a bigger population of people who are infected with it that it just doesn't work as well. So it's like you're back to the drawing board. And that effectiveness starts to go down. I might have a group of 10 healthy individuals that I'm studying, and it looks like, oh, it's 90% effective, it's fantastic. But that's in a healthy individual that might not even be infected. But when I get to my next population and my next phase, it doesn't always work so well. And that's the hardest part, I think, about this occupation, is because you're like, we've got to get it to a point where people who are actually infected and dealing with this disease, where we get it to like, hey, it's in the 90s, we can do this. But we just haven't gotten there yet. So, right. Oh, did you have another one? I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to make sure. So this one here, I'm going to hold. I can't remember who was 3 and 4. Okay, we're just going to go back rows. So I'll take yours.
So can you explain again why immunity from vaccination is superior to natural immunity again, when the root is essentially the same?
Oh, that's like one of my favorite questions. Absolutely. So as I was saying before, you don't walk into a test without studying, right? A vaccine literally will teach and train your immune system how to deal with something without actually having to deal with the infection, without making you sick. So yes, can I sit there and, of course I wouldn't do this, can I sit there and walk out and say, yeah, I'm gonna just naturally walk out here and I'm gonna get infected with COVID on purpose, and I'm gonna let my immune system deal with it. Problem is that I don't know any of the damage that virus has caused my system, because guess what? I don't have any protective barriers anymore. I didn't teach my immune system, I didn't teach my memory T cells how to fight this. My B cells might be able to give me a little bit of protection, but hey, that's just my first line of defense. My T cells might not know this immediately, and that's how you might end up in the hospital, or worse. That's what can happen. But if I teach my cells how to adapt to this without making it sick, my body, the vaccine is literally just giving me antibodies to work on. My cells are looking at this and they're memorizing it, and they're like, okay, next time that she comes into contact with this, I know how to deal with it and she won't get sick. Maybe I will get sick, maybe I'll end up with sniffles. But it's better than sitting there and ending up in the hospital. So it's kind of like that. Remember that it's kind of like training. A bodybuilder doesn't just walk up to a competition and say, here I am, and then have like a muscle like this big, right? Sits there and trains over time and over time and over time and gets stronger. That's kind of what a vaccine does.